Students' Union. We have both sides of the debate here with us today. I want to start off by welcoming anyone who is watching this, whether that be after the fact or now, as well as the people in the room who have come to watch. I just want to make it very clear that during this debate, there could be a content warning. There may be some mentioning of racism and in particular anti-Semitism. And I think it is important that we make people aware that, that these are themes that could be discussed during this debate. I'd ask that participants of the debate and people asking questions that first and foremost that you are kind, and remember that ultimately, we are all humans here and everyone deserves to be treated like a human. We would ask that people debate the facts and not the personalities presenting them. And then now I'll just move on to the rules of the debate itself. There will be 3 minutes to give their initial opening speech. That will begin with NUS, who is representing the Yes campaign. And after that, there will be another 3-minute speech by Caleb, who's representing the No campaign. Then there will be some questions that we have had pre-submitted. At the moment, there is a question for each candidate. If anyone in the room wishes to ask any questions at that point, they will then be able to do so. I was planning to limit the the answers to those questions to 1 minute each. If you could do your very best to stick to that, that would be absolutely amazing. Finally, just to make everyone aware that, as mentioned previously, this is being recorded and hopefully will be watched by many of your student colleagues over the coming days as the referendum campaign hots up. Probably should have introduced myself first, but I'm going to do it at the end of my my housekeeping speech. I'm Dom Anderson. I'm the Chief Executive of the Oxford Students' Union, but in this capacity, I'm the Deputy Returning Officer. And I'd just like to thank everyone for their attendance this evening. And so I will begin by handing over to Anis, who is going to start a 3-minute speech in favour of remaining members of NUS.
Right. So I am leading currently the campaign for Oxford students to remain affiliated to the NUS. The NUS is a powerful voice for students. It represents over 7 million students, 400 institutions, both FE and higher education. And it existed for 100 years, and it represented students when it comes to issues such as education, mental health, climate change, and social equality. And it represents us also when it comes to pressuring the government, but also pressuring specific SUs into changing and improving their work for their students. Being part of the NUS is not only beneficial for us as individuals, but also for the SU itself. NUS provides resources, trainings, support opportunities, and to even just generally collaborate with other SUs around our area, but also nationally. So for example, from our SU, we had obviously our leadership be part of 155 elected student officers who signed an open letter to the Chancellor in response to the budget back in 2020, demanding more support for students during the pandemic. And this is one of the strength of having this collective union where we come together to pressure the government. Oxford, you will hear in opposition argument, has access to other institutions, Russell Group, etc. But there is nothing like the NUS. There is no national union of every or most universities in the UK. And I say most because it's 97%. Now, that's not 100%, but it's still high enough. And I can go on to talk about the entire history of the NUS and the achievements throughout the 100 years, but in the last 2 years, NUS worked with SUs and student unions to pressure the government and secured more funding, secured £15 million into university hardship funds, campaigned with SUs to ban the use of NDAs, in 84 institutes across the UK, forced the U-turn on A-level grades back during the pandemic. And yeah, long story short, there are a lot of achievements from NUS, and I think Oxford, as well as student movement across the UK, will be disadvantaged by us leaving.
Thank you. As forgot to mention as well, as I'm timing this, I will let candidates know. I will show them the clock at 30 seconds, then give them a prompt when there are 10 seconds remaining. So that was Anes with the yes campaign, and now I will hand over to Caleb with the no campaign.
Thank you very much. I think it's important from the offset to realise that we're not having a referendum on whether the NUS has done some good work in the past. There's certainly been very real activism by the National Union of Students in the form that it had in the 20th century, and actually slightly more recently when it came to the pandemic, there was a role for it to play in negotiating. But the reality is it's 2023 and the National Union of Students isn't working. There's actually no president at the moment of the National Union of Students, but because the president was fired following an independent investigation into anti-Semitism. And I think this is really an endemic problem, as demonstrated by the fact that 3 of the last 5 NUS presidents have been embroiled in racism scandals. I think this is further driven home by the fact the government actually has now refused to negotiate or discuss key issues with the National Union of Students at all, therefore meaning it cannot act as an advocate for students at the University of Oxford as part of this national discourse. The reality is it can't serve the key function which it's supposed to be in order to represent students. And I think on the issue of representation, there's been a real breakdown. I think there's been a neglecting of student representation of those at Oxford. None of the officers of the National Union of Students are from Oxford University, for instance, and actually the NUS initiative process, which is one of the key channels through which students are supposed to be empowered to have their voices heard, hasn't seen a single proposal from the University of Oxford then approved by the National Conference in the last 5 years. The reality is the NUS doesn't represent us, and Oxford can advocate directly for students and push for comprehensive reform themselves as part of a broader national discourse. We do have the opportunity to work alongside other upstanding universities in the Russell Group, and actually we're in a unique position to be able to advocate directly to national government. The reality is when Oxford speaks, the country does listen. And I think this is a real opportunity to take a clear stand. I think we mustn't forget the very real cost, actually, that our membership of the National Union of Students has to the students of Oxford. We pay over £20,000 a year in membership dues. And when financial hardship is a real problem, both at Oxford and more broadly, I struggle to see how we can justify spending what's over the last couple of decades has amounted to hundreds of thousands on this project with fairly little tangible benefit. I think we're much better suited putting that to use in the liberation campaigns. I think also this is a growing movement. We're not the only university that's thinking about doing this. Reading, Queen Mary, Warwick already voted to disaffiliate from the NUS following the investigation into anti-Semitism. I think this represents a real opportunity to stand with students across the country to reject racism, embrace a positive vision for representative, compassionate, and effective student activism. I think we can take this opportunity to represent all students at Oxford equally and leave the National Union of Students.
Thank you. I wondered whether the candidates would like the opportunity in the reverse order to address any of the points that were made by their interlocutor at this point. If that's something that both candidates agree to, then I'm more than happy to do that. Is that something?
Yeah, let's do it.
Well, is that something you can actually with the talk, then?
I think we're best placed probably opening up to the audience.
Open up to the audience, okay. Well, okay, and that's fine as well. It has to be by consent. So now we had 2 submitted questions, so I'll go in reverse order. Question that was submitted online, and this is for the no campaign. By leaving the NUS, we surrender any influence we could use to end anti-Semitism in the organisation. Why shouldn't we stay and push for an end to anti-Semitism from within? Caleb, I'm going to give you 1 minute to answer that question. Starting now.
I think what we have to recognise is that this isn't a new problem. Yes, the president was forced out as a result of these scandals, but actually this marks the third scandal in the last 5 presidents. And it reaches a point where, unfortunately, you have to say that the issue is endemic, and that despite significant efforts for root and branch reform, it's simply not been possible. There's no reason why the National Union of Students has to have a monopoly on representation. And I think actually the clearest stand we can take against the racism that's been endemic within the National Union of Students is by disaffiliating from the organization, by remaining a part of it, by paying dues, and actually then perhaps by rejecting a disaffiliation motion like this. I think we'd be sending completely the wrong message nationally. We need to be taking a firm stand against racism, and the clearest way to do that is actually to say that we cannot in good conscience be affiliated with this organization and funding their activities.
Caleb. And now a question to the Yes campaign. Your campaign statement pictures the NUS as a powerful voice for students across the UK. The government now refuses to meet with the NUS and has removed representatives of the NUS from the Department of Education groups, which were the main source of its power and influence. How do you resolve this?
Yeah, no, it's completely understandable, and it was the right decision for the government to suspend relationship with the NUS. Yeah, back when the NUS made the mistake of electing the previous president, despite all the concerns that there was around it, I think it was right. However, I do see, I mean, that was only like a year ago, and that does not necessarily mean that the government will always or forever really suspend talks with the NUS. NUS recently has addressed all the or is trying to address all the concerns. You've got a new acting president, which means saying that there is no president is wrong, but also, most importantly, Chloe Field, who's the vice president for higher education, has made an official statement on behalf of NUS addressing anti-Semitism, which was the main concern when it comes to the government. Therefore, NUS does have the willingness to change and hopefully get back in touch with the government.
Thank you, Enes. So that makes up the questions that we had submitted to us. To be clear, there was a third question submitted, but the returning officer, along with myself, the decision was taken that was a question that was aimed more towards one of the people who were part of the debate rather than the actual debate itself. Any questions about that, please feel free to email the elections inbox, which I will provide shortly at the end of the meeting. So now I open up to any questions that may exist from the floor. Are there any? Yes, we have a question. Do you want to say your name and your college, and I'll repeat it for the record?
Niall Pearson Shaw, Merton.
Niall Pearson Shaw.
Pearson Shaw.
Niall Pearson Shaw, Merton College, JCR.
Yes. So, question. I have 2 questions. The first is for the campaign. So you say that there is this evident desire and willingness to change within however, I think if you look at the report from the back production notes, I think that in the past decade or so, there have been 6 separate anti-Semitism scandals and 6 separate reports. And of course, each report produced a kind of action plan, which the NUS has done again. Obviously, the problem was never solved in any 6 times before. So can't you just repeat that infinitely as always a reason to remain in the NUS? That there's apparently willingness to change?
Can I just repeat that for the record? Very broadly, the question was, in the wake of previous scandals and a lack of change, how can you be confident that NUS will show a willingness to change this time? I'll give you 1 minute to answer that.
Yeah. Again, you've got the situation where you've got the president right now, or the president-elect. When she obviously was accused of anti-Semitism, she just denied it and said, and even the people who were associated with her said the same thing. However, she was suspended. Other people who are related or associated with her also were let go. And again, the vice president has indicated and made an official statement to a UGS showing it And I've had multiple meetings before I even took this, because anti-Semitism is such an important issue for me, and I'm sure for many people, just to see the detailed plan in which NUS will try and fix this issue. However, this will not be solved overnight. The report came out last month. It will not be solved that quickly. Years of that's an intense minute.
Thank you. And did you say there was another question?
Was that for me as well?
So essentially,
Holding us accountable.
As Caleb pointed out, 5 of the last 5 presidents, 3 have been embroiled in
Yeah.
allegations like Shema Delali, Larissa Kennedy, and Mali Rouati. Now, given that they all belong to the same political bloc, the Liberation Left,
Yeah.
and Liberation Left has won 4 out of the past 5 presidential elections within the NUS, do you believe that politically it's feasible that Liberation Left, which has consistently produced candidates which are embroiled in the scandals, will cease to do so?
Right. I mean, I wouldn't want to get into details about specific factions. NUS is for everyone, and yeah, you got people who are very much to the right of the student movement and then to the left. So I wouldn't want to put ideological labels on it, but you're right. There are groups who may have in the past supported these individuals, and I think moving forward, I genuinely believe, and this is why I want Oxford to be part of that. Oxford has always sent sensible delegates who care about fighting racism, and to have officers in the future who are much better, who counter those other groups. You need to send delegates. If you just simply leave and you end up saying, oh, well, there is anti-Semitism, but I'm not going to be part of it, or like, oh, you can be anti-Semitic, it's just we're not going to be around to fight you. I think this is just a weak way out, basically, or easy way out.
Thank you.
Need more than that.
Are there any other questions in the room in particular? I'd be interested in seeing some questions for the No campaign. Yes, do you want to say your name and your college, if you're comfortable to do so, obviously?
My question is looking at the No campaign. So I'm personally always been very pro NUS. I'll just be very open about that. And for me, our last 5 presidents of the NUS have been marginalised people from working class backgrounds, marginalised in ethnicity and race, and they've been brilliant representations of, and women. They've been brilliant representations of equality in democracy that many people don't find in their own student union services. For example, be it Oxford Union, the Oxford Students' Union, I see no representation for who currently for who I affiliate, who I identify as. So tell me, what is the SU's approach to to replacing the representation that NUS brings to the university?
Do you want me to paraphrase that just for the record as well? So no, it's not that at all. So that was Holly Cooper from Harris Manchester College, whose question was around framing the fact that NUS has a lot of people from marginalised groups who win their elections and their leadership elections, in particular president, and that is not something that Holly recognises here, in particular at Oxford, and that it is something that Holly wonders how that is replicated in those structures of representation here. Caleb, you're going to have 1 minute on that question.
So I think, unfortunately, it cannot be reasonably said that the National Union of Students has been an open, diverse and inclusive organisation in light of the independent investigation into anti-Semitism. While you have had representation clearly of individuals from groups who have been marginalised in the National Union of Students, unfortunately, we can't get around the fact that 3 of the last 5 presidents have peddled or effectively been complicit in the peddling of pernicious anti-Semitism within the organisation. I think what we need to recognise is that, unfortunately, it is possible for individuals from minority groups to still have their own prejudices. And I think what we've seen is the NUS has fallen prey to a very specific form of prejudice when it comes to the Jewish community. And that's really something that we can't be involved with. What I would say is we've got 3 women, we've got multiple ethnic minority officers for the student union in the coming year. There's excellent representation there. We can represent the interests of students, and we can do that far more effectively outside of this organisation.
Yes. Was there any follow-up question there, or any other questions in the room for, particularly for no as well, because I would like to see a balanced debate. Oh, sorry, was there a follow-up first? It's fine if
I can come back. If I can,
that's absolutely fine. Yeah,
fully formed, but I don't want to just.
Absolutely fine. Thank you, Holly.
I guess my question is similar, but I'm.
Sorry, could I ask your name, if you wish to give it? Ilse Pitt from Malton College. Yeah, sorry. Okay, Magdalen College. Yeah, apologies.
I guess I'm the idea of how the SU could fight for long-term change and also clear change for universities. If I haven't really seen the SU do that in my time here at Oxford, and the NUS has made changes, like you said, during the pandemic, really helpful changes. And of course we're in 2022 now, but there might be another pandemic, there might be other things that I haven't seen the SU fight for the way that the NUS has, but you've seen them like that long-term plan.
To paraphrase that question then, thank you. The question there was that in the opinion of the questioner, the SU has not been seen to campaign for long-term change in a way that the National Union of Students has. How will that gap be filled in campaigning for that long-term change? The example was given of during the pandemic and a few other things that I think were also discussed as well. So Caleb, you're going to have a minute on that question once I get my pick. Thank you. Yeah.
So I think the reality is that the kind of advocacy that the National Union of Students has engaged in the past simply isn't possible at the moment. The government has cut ties with the National Union of Students and will not negotiate with them. And so it's not a choice of NUS representation to government or SU representation to government. It's a choice between SU representation to government or no representation to government. And I think there is a very real alternative in the medium term when it comes to the engagement we already have with other Russell Group universities. We've had direct discussion in the past with both London universities and some of the top Russell Group universities in terms of prioritising student concerns. And I think there's a real possibility to re-engage with those. As I said, there are already a number of universities, including Queen Mary's in London and Warwick, who have disaffiliated and are looking to work for the best interests of their students. I think the only way we're going to do that is by being able to advocate to government, and actually the NUS can't do that because government won't talk to them.
Thank you, Caleb. That's your time. Appreciate that. Yeah, okay, there is a follow-up question here from Holly. For the no campaign, I will seek a yes campaign question to balance that up afterwards. So
the current argument, consistent argument, is that the government who currently will not discuss, will not negotiate or have communications with the NUS. That's the current government. So let's just say if we take such a involved decision to disaffiliate with the NUS, what's to say that the next government that comes in completely sort of like invigilates the NUS as it is now, and then we are no longer a part of that? Are we sure that the current government is right in saying that this association, this students' union, is are we sure that the current motivations of the current government are something that we should be aligning with in their opinions to the NUS? Considering the current government has so many problematic and controversial approaches to marginalised communities. So should we then be following what the government's currently doing? Is that the image that Oxford Student Union wants to give?
Thanks. So I'll paraphrase that one as well. So in Holly's opinion, that with the government in its current form, do we feel that it is correct that we take their view on NUS as being one that shapes this decision when governments can change.
And the current government that we're basing this all off of has so many controversies considering marginalisation and marginalisation communities, also classism.
In the wake of in Holly's view, the current government having many opinions that detriment marginalised people, as well as some classism as well. So I'm going to hand that one over to Caleb. I'm sorry to keep repeating everything. I want to make sure that the debate is fully heard online as well. So Caleb, again, you have a minute to respond.
Thank you. I think the reality is that the government refusing to negotiate with the National Union of Students isn't the cause of the problem, it's a symptom of the problem. And the problem is that multiple independent investigations, not by the government, not by Oxford SU most certainly, and not by those with specific political interests, have found endemic anti-Semitism and have found that key individuals, including the president most recently, have been guilty of anti-Semitism. And I think the reality is that this is a very serious problem in the National Union of Students. It's a problem that repeatedly there have been attempts to supposedly reform, which have failed. I think we are seeing exactly the same sort of dialogue now as we had after previous scandals, and it didn't work. There's a point at which you say the organisation in its current form isn't something that we should be a part of, actually isn't something that we should be bankrolling, which we are doing at the moment by paying membership dues to the National Union of Students. And I think it's entirely possible in several years' time to consider rejoining some sort of national organisation, whether that's the NUS, whether it's a new organisation remains to be seen.
Thank you, Caleb. So now I'd like to seek a question from the floor for the Yes campaign, in the interest of attempting to balance. Yeah. Good. It's going to be a long night trying to find balance.
Specifically to the conferences. And I think it was the delegates to the 20 and the 22 conference who made known in Student Council that while at this conference, which is meant to be intersectional for the liberation of all marginalized groups, they managed somehow to experience forms of bigotry covering 5 different marginalized groups: ableism, sexism, racism, homophobia, and transphobia. On that basis, do you think that that changes the debate, that it's not the issues in the realm of bigotry are not limited strictly to anti-Semitism?
Right. Yeah, I think I briefly remember that mentioned in one of the previous meetings. Obviously, it's disappointing, and NUS should definitely do better in terms of welfare, but also ensuring that students are aware of how to deal with others from other SUs and other cultures, but also most importantly, and this is I think an argument that Caleb keeps referring to, which is that 3 out of the last 5 NUS presidents had statements or made comments that are anti-Semitic. That is absolutely disappointing and disgusting. But let's not forget that also Oxford SU is not, away from these problems. I mean, last year's statement from the SU said NUS is now being, and I quote, being weaponized by the government. Being weaponized. Oh my God, the clock is being weaponized by the government to reduce debate about Israel and Palestine. God.
Sorry, apologies, and I'd like to apologise as well for those watching that. Actually, I didn't paraphrase your question, which was around when we've sent delegates in the past to conferences, they've witnessed many forms of discrimination happening, and how do we justify our continued membership, I believe, in the wake of that. Now, I know you do have a follow-up question for the Yes campaign, but I would like to make sure that this is as balanced a debate as possible. So if someone can okay, so if you as long as you have a question for the No campaign, I will take another one for the Yes campaign, because even better. Thank you very much.
So the essential question is that the NUS, as an organisation of student unions, provides very specially tailored support towards student unions, and one of those is the training that staff and staff, especially from Oxford, receive in how to, which is especially important to SABs who remain in their position for 1 year. And given the expense that would be associated with getting that training from other sources, how do you think would be the best way to address that if we were to be here?
So how would you address the gulf that would exist in the current training and resources that NUS provides for students' unions if we were to leave. And you have 1 minute starting from my phone unlocking. Okay, now, thank you.
So I think it's important to remember that actually a substantial amount of resources that the NUS has are paid for by the membership dues, and Oxford is sending membership dues to the National Union of Students. I think we already have some excellent training when it comes to the sabbatical officers of the Oxford Student Union, and the majority of the work they do, the majority of guidance they get, isn't directly from the National Union of Students. We would see as a slightly greater involvement of that when it comes to running the Oxford SU, but I think there's no reason why that's not feasible, and we certainly will be able to bring back money from the National Union of Students in order to fund that, because we're no longer sending that to the NUS. I think also what's very important to note is that its current structure, it's certainly not representing or advocating for values that we as a student body should believe in. I think also prior to the very recent U-turn, NUS delegates weren't actually going to get the workshop training at the National Union of Students Conference. So I think it's very unclear whether they're going to continue to provide the support effectively.
Thank you, Caleb.
Can you clarify his last point?
There will, to be clear, there will be an opportunity at the end for both of you to sum up your positions, and also maybe if you wish to, present some form of question. But I think it's important that we keep this debate in order where possible. So I believe there was one more question in the room for yes.
That's you.
Was that you? Yeah. Okay. No problem. I just literally snorted. Sorry. Thank you.
So as it stands, because of our contractual relationship with the NUS, we have to go through a referendum. If we didn't, there would be severe legal issues for us, and there would be essentially the opportunity for things to sue us for disaffiliating without a referendum. However, we can reaffiliate with the NUS, like the trustee board or the student council doing it in a far quicker process than calling a referendum. Given that it takes so long to disaffiliate, but we can reaffiliate so quickly, doesn't it make sense to make a powerful statement that we can then amend if, for instance, the government or a new government does decide to start engaging with it?
Sorry. So yeah, to paraphrase that question, with reaffiliation allegedly being much easier than disaffiliation, how are you going to? Sorry, do you not feel that it's important that we send this message at this time, so that it proves a point to NUS about their current status? Would that be a good paraphrasing?
Yeah.
Close enough.
Yeah. I would take it with a pinch of salt of how easy it is. I think there is a lot of admin just generally, but also more specifically, I think, and I could correct this later when I find out exactly, but the email should be sent if a single SU wants to disaffiliate by June, July. So not necessarily by December. December is the time when you leave. So that's one. So if we leave by June, even if we decide to affiliate in Michaelmas, it's too late by then. And the most important thing is, even if we leave to make a powerful statement, well, we will lose our right to get involved in next year's leadership election at NUS. And if we want to see NUS getting better, we can't just hope for the best by being outside and say, oh, when you get better, we'll come back. We should be part of it. We should be part of the change and get delegates, sensible delegates from Oxford to vote for candidates that will make NUS much, much better.
Thank you. And I believe at that point we do have a debate that's balanced, unless there are any more questions in the room. Oh, you've got questions? Okay, that's fine. It's one question, and is it to both candidates? Oh, okay, no problem. Okay, so we have.
You come on. Okay.
Is it a question that you could direct to both, or
which one is it? And you have a question for me, right?
I can come up with another.
Okay, go for it.
Okay, that's fine. I'm just very cautious. I want to make sure that
literally scrutinizing Anna seriously.
You may be able to go on all night, but the chair of this debate cannot. No, that's fine. So Holly, another question. Yeah. That's yeah. So I've said allegedly instead because I couldn't remember his name, but I do apologise for this. Yeah,
That's what.
yeah. Niall. Yeah, but for future reference, I apologise for that, Holly.
My question, how much is Oxford student union paying in dues?
So the question was, how much is Oxford SU paying to be members of the National Union of Students? You have a minute, should you need it, starting now.
Well, I think in monetary terms, it's a fairly civil response, which is we're paying over £20,000 a year in membership dues and have been for an extended period of time now. There are additional costs which we also pay to the National Union of Students associated with the various actions that they take and the organisations they support. So the total number is larger than that. But I think the real cost actually is to the credibility of the institution of the Oxford Student Union, continuing to bankroll and be part of the National Union of Students, despite the very serious problems that it's demonstrated at the moment. I think that there is an enormous role that Oxford actually has to play in shaping the national discourse. When we talk, people do listen. And you see this in the coverage in the national press of the decisions that Oxford makes. And so I think the real cost here is the opportunity cost that we've not seized this chance to make an, I think, completely unrelegated and very clear stand against racism, against anti-Semitism, and against discrimination of all forms by disaffiliating from the National Union of Students.
Are you happy for me to
Yes,
push that question over to the Yes campaign as well?
Please. Okay, thank you.
Okay, same question to the Yes campaign.
Yes. I really want to address this point because it keeps getting mentioned. It's just that we pay the NUS £24,000. We are one of the lowest SUs, the lowest paying fees across the UK. We compared to other SUs, they pay much more, and we gain much more than we pay. NUS and the collective of having multiple students or student unions fighting the government and trying to negotiate with them over the COVID-19. We had an NUS COVID campaign, which we secured £15 million across the UK. Oxford SU alone received 152,000 across the year from 2020 to 2021. And then there was the NUS cost of living campaign, which is the current one, which is from 2022 to 2023. And we gained £27,000, which is more than we pay. And that's without the government having contact with the NUS. We keep pushing collective campaigning with students. Oh my God.
Thank you.
Done.
Thank you. Okay, I believe we have balance in the room,
Yes.
the debate. And so I'm happy to move on to summing up now. So the person who started last time was Anne S. So I'm going to invite Caleb to begin summing up. I will give you 3 minutes on this one as well, should you wish to use it. And it will start as soon as you start speaking.
So I think what we've seen in the debate this evening is that these students at the University of Oxford are presented with a real choice. Do we continue to accept the lip service that the National Union of Students has paid to the very deep-seated problem of racism and in particular anti-Semitism within the organisation? Do we just suppose that after numerous independent investigations and after repeated claims of reform that we will suddenly see some sort of real change? Or do we actually take a substantial stand in a way that we haven't done in the past against this issue? I think the question is whether we want to actually be an SU that stands up for the interests of students, whether we want to be able to represent those students' interests to national government in a way that we can't at the moment, with the government refusing to engage with the National Union of Students, whether we want to actually instead seize the initiative to be able to have that direct discourse with the government and with other outstanding universities across the country through cooperation with the Russell Group and our broader regional and national partnerships. I think there's a question of whether we want to continue to input substantial funds to an organisation that doesn't represent our values and actually doesn't listen to our students, one that hasn't backed a single motion proposed by, and that it's from Oxford, within the past 5 years, one which has no officers from the University of Oxford. And I think that what's even more serious, actually, is that this is an ongoing issue and that there hasn't been effective reform. I think it reaches a point where you have to say an organisation is moribund and actually the only way that we can hope to achieve real reform now of the National Union of Students, but more importantly of the national student movement in general, is actually to take a stand against the current organisation. The NUS has had effectively a monopoly on student representation for the past century or so, but the reality is it's not working for students. It's not working for students at the University of Oxford. And actually, I'd like to touch on the cost point earlier. The government will be able to provide funds directly to universities. The notion that by leaving the National Union of Students, our students somehow aren't going to be subject to any sort of funding or support by the government, I think would be inaccurate. And actually, if anything, we'd be in a far stronger position to be able to directly negotiate the best possible arrangements for students at the University of Oxford. I think the idea that this is some fringe push is simply inaccurate. The reality is that there are already several universities that have chosen to disaffiliate. As I said, Reading, Queen Mary, Warwick, for instance. And what this has done is it's highlighted in the national press the very serious issues in the NUS. I think this would be exactly the headline-grabbing move that we need to take a comprehensive stand against racism and actually to, I think, prompt a fundamental reevaluation of the national student representational movement, and that's the best interest of students at Oxford.
Thank you, Caleb. And now I hand over to the Yes campaign to sum up.
Yeah.
Start as soon as you begin speaking.
Right. It's really simple. From all the debate, you've seen that there are problems with the NUS, but we really gotta just stay and fight. We can't just see a problem and say it's not ours or let it happen. Let's just, be okay, because it ends up falling into this Oxford exceptionalism argument, which is we're much better somehow than other people or whatever. And one of the statements that keeps being made, which is that we have will get the Oxford SU to work with universities across the UK, working with the Russell Group. The Russell Group are not the universities across the UK. There is only one national union, one organisation that actually brings students together, and it is NUS. The point about there are no single proposals from Oxford approved by National Conference in the last 5 years, that is probably because Oxford didn't send any proposals to NUS in the last 5 years. They can't approve anything if you don't send them. If you say NUS officers are, none of them are from Oxford. There is only 3-4 officers elected nationally. You can't expect them to be from Oxford. If you want them to be from Oxford, that is Oxford exceptionalism. And again, you say we pay £20,000 a year. I already mentioned the points and how Oxford gains back from it. But the arguments, which are such an argument written on a bus, which is if we bring this money back, we will pay it for the SU campaigns and our events, or pay it back into SU staff training. They can make any claim. Campaigns can make any claim during referendums. They don't have to follow them. We didn't see 350 million back into the NHS. We're not going to see 24,000 being paid for campaigns. And if this argument is that the government will already pay students anyway without whether we have an NUS or not, it's ridiculous. The government never pays anyone really without a pressure, without collective action. And generally speaking, there is and I mentioned it already, that the government was right in cutting the communication with the NUS back after that election of the previous president. But the government right now, as one of the audience mentioned, the government just simply has a difficult relationships with all trade unions. The government is not supportive of collective action. They're not a big fan of it. They're not dealing with any other unions. They're not sitting with them, RMT, etc. They're not going to sit with the National Union of Students. They wouldn't want to. And for that, we need real action, not grabbing headlines from Oxford leaving NUS. And this is why I urge you to vote yes. This is why we should keep Oxford with NUS, and we should stand united with students across the UK, use the position we're in to help them and help students have a better life.
Thank you, Enes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So that does conclude our debate this evening. I'd like to thank everyone for their contributions. I hope you will all agree we've had a balanced debate, and this event was about making sure that students get the best information possible. For more information, please head over to our website. That's the Oxford SU website, and click on the referendum tab, where you will find statements from both campaigns. And also both campaigns will be able to publicise shortly where you can find their their referendum material. The timeline is as follows. Voting opens on the 27th of February at 8 AM and closes on the 1st of March at 6 PM. And the results will be announced at 7:30 on the 1st of March. Please obviously do encourage people to engage with the debate, and if they feel strongly enough, to vote. I'd like to, I know there's not a huge amounts in the room, but I'd like to signal a thanks to both of our campaign leaders today for providing their views on why you should vote in the way you should. So we're going to say bye to the people online, and thank you for watching.